The over specialization of the brain, yeah, that seems to be a part of the modern ethos. Paleolithic man had to have that full spectrum. They had to have both sides of the brain working on their task, and they had
Mhm.
to have a wide variety of skill sets and understandings. And I think that in modern society, it's not quite required. Like people can have a very narrow focus and a very narrow field of expertise, and then get the greenbacks, from that skill to pay everybody else to do everything else for them. So it's not necessarily necessary for us to have those full skill sets and those full modalities of a wider understanding. And I
Yeah, it's
think
very
it's
reductionistic.
and it's to the detriment of the individual organism, because
Hmm.
if we're just parts in a machine, then that machine itself, the machinery, is not focused on what it takes to be a whole individual. It's not important. So our kids are not educated on some of these basic fundamental principles of health and well-being from an individual level. All they're educated on is based upon how they can fit into the broader organization, and that has nothing to do with the other. And so we're bifurcated and we've segregated ourselves from the individual health, and we're just worried about these social structures and things like Common Core education, which has been adopted here in the United States, really just splits the brain into pieces with some of its illogical mathematics and the inability for most young people to do deep critical thinking. I think is a byproduct of their poor education that most of us are receiving these days.
Yeah, I have a thought. It doesn't totally overlap with that, but I used to be really cynical. I'm left-handed, and I find I think a little differently, and 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 I've always felt that way, and I just feel like I don't always connect with everybody. But I guess at some point I realized that perhaps that I shouldn't be so cynical about that. I do think that we need about, it seems like about 90% of the population, or even 90% of an individual, seems to have to be kind of more conservative and stick with what we know and stay in line and do what everybody else is doing. And then
Mm-hmm.
the way I see it, there's kind of like 10% of people who are like trailblazers and going off the
Mm-hmm.
beaten path and searching for all sorts of new things. But what I was not giving enough credit is that that's really dangerous, right? Like it's really dangerous to do what nobody else is doing, because it's probably stupid and you're probably going to die, and you're probably best to stick with the pack. But once in a while it's really good and you find something that's really valuable. And then the tough thing is, how do you bring the rest of the tribe
Mm-hmm.
to go explore that path with you, and how do you convince them that it's worth it, because they're all going to be dead set on going down the normal route, right?
Especially if they're not receptive to it, because a lot of the experiences now are filtered through digital media. So it's hard for a group, the tribe, the body of the hierarchy, to actually see when some of these outliers are having success, because there's filters placed in front of all our experiences. So we don't really have that direct experiences with what's that guy over there doing, and then being able to witness with your own eyes the process of either success or failure. And I believe that we can learn from either. Live and learn from fools and sages. We can learn from people's mistakes as well as our own, but then we should be able to have the awareness to notice when things are going right, and when the people do stray from the tribal norms, that we can incorporate that into our own experience if it's beneficial. And that's where
Hmm.
life is experimental. Like there's a art to living. It's more of an art than a science, and not everything works for everybody. And so there's different paths, I think, for us all. And in these structural hierarchies, I think there's room for competition of ideas and competitions for ways of life. And that's the wonderful thing about the human being, because we are so adaptive and we're curious and we're innovative, and we do a lot of things that are sometimes contradictory, and sometimes they're harmonious. But I think it takes the fullness of that experience for us to make what is truly considered progress in the human endeavor.
Hmm. You could probably relate to this too, but I know it's kind of tough to do that sometimes. In the past, I've like what you were speaking about with using just your own eyes and real world experience and being pragmatic. I know I've tried things like I researched something about diet and nutrition, and I try it just full thinking that it's going to be the best thing ever. And for a while I keep thinking that, but I'm not paying attention to my actual self and what's actually happening to me. And yeah, that just happened to me too many times before I eventually started to realize and become able to actually see things for how they are, and I guess to the degree that I can, and to ask myself if it's actually working, right? It can be tough. And I'm sure you can relate to that kind of experience of kind of maybe dogmatically going into approaches or stuff, but
Yeah, well, that's something that I think you have to be wired for, to be able to recognize patterns and jump in and jump out of them willfully and with your own volition. And so that's something that I've done from a very early age with just basic thought experiments. I think I was exposed to a lot of stoicism and philosophy when I was younger, and just basically knowing that we can control our own reactions, but we can't necessarily control the entire world. And so, like, what I react to, what I experience. So if I become interested in one field of philosophy, like Stoicism, then I can really put myself into that and really just live in that detached way. Or if I want to become, more Eastern minded and take Taoism for, a ride, I've been able to do that, and then kind of complement it with existentialism, and then bring in this, libertarianism. There's different types of isms and modalities of thinking and philosophy that, if you truly embrace it and try to live it like the people who envisioned it, you can really experience a broader breadth
mhm.
of what this life has to offer. And then you can compare and contrast in your own mind between the hemispheres of the brain. You can actually utilize different aspects of this philosophy that work and some aspects that don't. And even if they don't work, damn, they're well worth the experience,
Mhm.
because what I've learned in the process. And
Yeah,
so
I
there's not
think
enough of that.
I
Yeah,
think a
go.
lot of people, I think, I don't know whether it's like it might be adaptive, because I think you have to have a lot. I think it's a sign of intelligence to be able to accept an idea into your head without it, to let an idea come into your head without it totally taking you over and permeating your cognitive or your your mental structures, right? And to and I think a lot of people are kind of scared and feel threatened, almost like they're going to be infected with a mind virus in a way. And I view it as like it's kind of it's I think it's very similar to how we change our behavior with under threat of physical infection. I think people become distanced and put up walls and become more authoritarian under threat of physical infection. And I think it's the same thing with mental viruses, right? If you feel a lot of people who are more, I guess, mentally unwell are kind of more closed off to different ideas and people who have different opinions. Do you ever notice that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And maybe when people aren't unwell and their brains aren't working properly, just the mechanics that it takes for them to interact socially and to be able to feel a part of a community just aren't functioning. And so it's impossible for them to feel that level of connection or understanding, or even wanting to on a certain level. And
Mm.
so, I recommend people who have mental health issues to take a broad assessment of their overall general health and say, what else could be the issue? Why don't I feel optimally? Why don't I feel like I can connect to a greater society? Or why am I angry all the time at everything? Because that's not productive and that's not helpful. The problem is a lot of it stems from biological pollution and things that are outside of the scope of the understanding. So you don't know what you don't know. And so if your trace levels of mercury are just slightly elevated, or your trace levels of lead, cadmium, or fluoride, and some of these other substances that get into the tissues that aren't detectable on these blood tests and these standard methods of care, then you could be fogged in a way that you could possibly fathom what the source is. And so you continue and searching for all these other solutions. And sometimes they get pretty far out, like end stage veganism, where you've just malnourished your body to the point where you can't think straight, or when you're just taking so many supplements that you don't know how to properly nourish yourself with whole foods. And so there's these different roads people take, and they don't realize, way back there you missed a turn. You weren't supposed to just keep going and trying all these far out things before you address the fundamentals. Is your basic water clean? Is your air clean? Do you clothe yourself with plastic, or do you cover your body with synthetic chemicals constantly, or do you take pharmaceutical drugs that might be masking symptoms but not dealing with the underlying problems? So there's a lot of things just at a fundamental level that I think people don't recognize before they start down all these other rabbit holes. And so
Yeah.
that's fundamentals, start with 101.
Well, it's Plato's allegory of the cave, right? People don't know what's outside the cave, and well, it's scary to think about it.
And some people go outside that cave and they freak out, and then they
Yeah.
come back and say, don't go there. But maybe they didn't have the fortitude, or they didn't have the understanding or the vision to recognize what they saw outside the cave. And so they run back and they tell everybody that there's nothing there and that you're better off in the cave. And so that's what we call experts these days.
Yeah.
That,
Or it doesn't benefit them if they leave the cave. So
yeah, because then everybody will be free to wander about in the sunshine. And why do I need an expert for? It's a freaking beautiful day. Hey, I can sit there and enjoy what life has to offer. I don't need any other input other than what nature and what's before me. And so that kind of leaves a lot of experts and a lot of people who make their bread on selling themselves as experts. It leaves them out in the cold. And you can stay in the cave. I'm not opposed to it. And I'm not saying everybody, after living a life in the cave, can acclimate to different level of being without consequences, without it shattering eggshell minds and whatnot. But it should be an option for people who are willing to go down that path, and it shouldn't be discouraged. And I see it being discouraged at a young age in many people on societal levels, not just nutrition, but just politically and the family structure and social life. It's on all scales of human existence. Like, this type of curiosity seems to be pruned, too prematurely, and for good reason. Like, we can go into why, because highly modernized societies where large numbers of people live in close quarters, you have to control, you have to regulate, you have to manage in a certain way, and or else chaos ensues. And so there's reasons for it.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, right?
Yeah, there's the civilization has its pros, like the methods of technology and this great communication technology we're using now, came off the backs of millions and millions of people working factory type existences and very narrow modalities of life in order to facilitate that. So, like, there's benefits to living the modern life. I'm saying there's got to be a way to integrate the best of both worlds, where we can still function as a healthy, sane individual and have our roles in society and have to work our menial tasks so that we can perform something that would be for the greater good, while at the same time maintaining our individual value. And that's a very hard thing to do. And so I think hierarchies and structures like this break down once people lose that sense of identity and sense of worth. And so I think in modern societies, we don't have that as much as we do in maybe more primitive or even earlier modern societies, where the concept of the neighborhood or the small community or people with interest groups, playing sports, and there's all these other types of surrogate activities and interest groups where you can be a part of a smaller group of people that and that know you, and that you have a place in the world. But what happens now is, in this pod living 15-minute city world, they're basically creating, I guess, a human equivalent of the mouse universe 25, where that dystopian mouse experiments where, we're going to give you everything you possibly want. You don't need to go anywhere more than 15 minutes from your home, because your food, your sleeping arrangements, recreational activities are all here. So everything will be absolutely wonderful. But what they found out in practice in the mouse experiments is after a certain concentration of population is reached, their social structures collapse because every single one of the beings in that 15-minute city or in that cluster loses their personal identity, and they no longer fight for status. They never try to achieve anything. They no longer try to even reproduce. And so we can see
Probably eating
parallels.
kibble.
Yeah, well, then see, that's the factor that wasn't considered in the 1970s experiment. Like these were, yeah, top-notch lab mice that were
Right.
probably fed just the basic kibble on
Yeah.
top of it. So there's other factors involved. But just imagine if you take a few of those mice out and yeah, feed them some organic, raw, maybe even some animal-based foods, and then give them a vacation from that 15-minute city hellhole, and then come to terms with different ways of making that life tolerable. And so I think that's where we're at now, because there's a
Hmm.
lot of people that are living in urban life and that's what they're acclimated to, but we can make it better, and we can make it better in a meaningful way. Well, while at the same time I see the societal trends taking us the complete opposite direction. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to push back. We're trying
I
to
can
push
see
back
that you
for
you have a vision of this, eh? I can see that. And
how it can work.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way with diet, I think we almost have it like the best we've ever had in a way, because in the past everything was organic, and you didn't have to worry about vegetable seed oils or something, or any processed food or something like that, or chemicals in it. But like today we have the advantage of an abundance of food, and they used to have to always worry about starving and when was their next
Mhm.
meal. But today we almost, like, if you know the right things, you have it better than anybody else who ever lived, right? But the thing that's tricky today is trying to get through all the information and discern that and see what's actually good. And I think, kind of relating to what you're getting at, um, I think one of the dangers that I see is I feel like people have always tried to control other people with food, and in the past it was kind of more obvious and blatant. Like Britain tried to control the Irish people by getting rid of their cattle. A lot of people don't realize this, but they think that Irish people were always farming potatoes, but they had a lot of cattle, and they really thrived on the meat and the milk from their
Yeah.
cattle.
It made them unmanageable.
Yeah, well,
Because
exactly, yeah.
they were food independent.
Yeah,
And so what happened was is yeah, they got rid of the cattle, they forced the potato crops on them,
yeah,
and not all of the potato crops failed. It's just after eating potatoes just for a few years, the resolve of the people weakened, and then they allowed the British to basically take what
hmm,
little food did grow, and then they starved
yep,
because their cattle was cut off. They weakened the resolve. They were fed the vegetable foods, and then within a couple generations, there was no strong men willing to stand and fight. All
yep.
the good strong ones got on a boat and came over here, and here I am. Thank God to those people. I got Irish blood in me.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and so the same thing happened to Geronimo. Like Geronimo left the reservation
Well, that's what I was gonna
because they
say
wouldn't
next.
let
Yeah.
him because they wouldn't let him raise cattle. And
Hmm.
so they because the U.S. government recognized this. If you let the Comanche people eat a diet of cattle, they become unmanageable. They just go wherever their cattle go, and they don't want to sit on a reservation and be
Yeah.
told where they can go and what they can do. And so they denied him. And he was a medicine man, and he was a healer, and he understood intuitively that his people their spirits would die on that type of lifestyle with that type of diet. So he ran off the reservation. That was the prime factor. And what I'm trying to make is a terms of agreement with the current uh, reservation runners, because that's basically what we're on. We're put on a federal reservation, and there's regulations to manage us like they did the indigenous peoples.
Hmm.
And so we have to fight for terms. And my terms are we should have access to good quality animal based foods and
Hmm.
give us those accesses, and we'll continue to work in your cities and manage your corporations and do all this wonderful thing called human civilization. But there has to be a fair arrangement, or we will not be allowed, we won't function, we won't be able to keep the machines functioning. This is where I think there's a disconnect between the classes. Highly functional, highly intelligent, well nourished people can be very productive, and it could be very a lucrative agreement. It could be made between the people and the owners and the rulers. And so why can't we come to terms? Just give us this basic human right, and we will acquiesce and come to some type of compromise on a lot of these other issues. And so
Yeah.
I don't see where there isn't room to negotiate.
Well, I
I
don't
think
know.
we
The story's never really gone that way though, has it?
no, because there's no champions like me that are allowed at those meetings. They're not allowed. I'm not allowed a seat at that table.
Hmm.
Somebody like me, because I'm too far out. I'm too radical. I don't have any credentials. I don't have any legal authority to be present at these discussion groups. But if I could just be a fly on the wall, I'd like to know exactly how they go, if they go. Maybe they don't. Maybe there isn't really a round table of people of power and influence that actually know what's going on enough to discuss these things. Maybe
Yeah.
it's just up to us, here and now, these small discussions. And so that's where I take my time. I'll radicalize the Canadians. Come on, rah rah! It's about
Yeah.
time. You're 200 years late to the party, but
We need it. I want to spill some
yeah,
tea in the water.
amen.
Yeah. But yeah, you brought up the second point I was going to talk about was when the Europeans came over to North America, what did they do? They shot all the bison, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they came over, the people living on the plains here were like 6 feet tall and running down bison on foot and perfectly healthy. And, they made sure to take away their food supply, their meat. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what was, I mean, there are many causes, but that's one of the biggest causes for their decline in health. And I think that's what people are doing today, you know, powerful people or organizations. I don't know, hard to name, but I think people do that today in a different way with just kind of with confusing people with misinformation, with promoting veganism and kind of demonizing red meat, and trying to feed you crickets and stuff, and it's like it sounds like we're putting on our tinfoil hats, but people have always done this. They've always tried to control people by taking away their most nutritious food, their meat. And
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh yeah,
it shouldn't surprise us if people are doing it today. Right? That's all.
yeah.
That's
The
all I
days of
think.
Robin Hood, where they would shoot you if they caught you hunting a rabbit to feed your
Right.
starving wife,
Yeah.
and they feed your kids, meat from wild game. They had a whole battalions of these goons that would, if they caught you with a rabbit in your pot, they cut your head off.
Yeah.
And so the peasants were a foot shorter than the royals. And so
Hmm.
there's this bifurcation, this separation of the classes, dietarily. And so this is something that is continuing, which is beyond me because I thought we got past this through the Enlightenment, but, we're regressing. And so the idea that you can keep a certain portion of the population weak and malnourished, and that's some type of viable option for creating a better future, it's an anathema to my mind. I don't believe they've thought this through. Like, my idea is it's not necessarily the quantity of people on this earth that matters, it's the quality. It's how well they are, how well they work together, how powerful their individual minds are, and how that integrates into the greater collective. And so, why not the lowest of the low, the poorest of the poor, feed them a diet that will grow their children to have the same level of IQ as the founding fathers of this country? And so, what we're not seeing that, we're seeing a regression. We're seeing a lowering of the general intelligence of the general population. And how can that possibly be a good thing?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I don't think they're consciously. I don't know if people are consciously scheming these things, or if it's just
I don't
like
know either.
instinct to kind of, you want to, other than your direct kin, like you want to have power over other people, or I don't know. I think it
Tribalism.
also comes from a bit of a sickness too. I think some people are more sick in body and in mind, and they want to. Those are the types of people who want to have power over other people. And I think the
And
people
then,
who are most healthy and the most well balanced kind of just let other people do their thing and are more libertarian in that respect, and you know live and let
yeah,
live.
yeah, here I am.
Yeah.
It's me. I mean, that's honestly me. Is like, I don't want that headache. I don't want to be in that room with a bunch of people that are throwing their fits because they're, carb crashing and then making everything about something that's completely unrelated to the true nature of the problem we're facing, and then go through the subterfuge and the chicanery and all that. Just, oh my God, you'd have to be a little mental to want to enter into that life. And
Yeah, and
so,
if you're not when you do, you will be later. Yeah.
right. It's like I'm already teetering on the edge right now. I mean, I can cope where I'm at, but I can't imagine trying to take on more than I can chew, which I
Hmm.
have from time to time. But
Yeah.
we're always pushing those boundaries and pushing those limits. But yeah, there's something else entirely about the authoritarian structure of society and how we always organize ourselves into authoritarian hierarchies.
Hmm.
And the question of public opinion, it determines often a lot. And we don't realize what power we have, even if we're not a part of the power structure. Just the sense of what is fair and what is right. If we can be educated well on the science of good governance, then we can at
Hmm.
least recognize when we're being screwed over.
Yeah, there's
And
almost
that's
an emergence of kind of like if all your cells are healthy, then the individual will be healthy, and if all the people are healthy, then the society will be
yeah,
healthy too, right?
yeah. So
Are you
true evil
familiar
is
with
self.
Randy? Sorry?
Go for it. Just
Oh,
notice.
are you familiar with Randy Thornhill and his parasite stress theory of values?
Uh-uh.
Okay, so
Um.
he it's really like robust data, and he looks at different cultures and societies and how heavy their parasite load is, or how basically like how immune stricken they are, and it's it very highly correlates with how authoritarian they are. So if they are more sick and less healthy, then they are more authoritarian. Kind of what I was talking about earlier. They put up walls because if you're really weak and vulnerable to infection or disease, then you're going to kind of view other people as a threat, and so you kind of it changes your politics in a way, and it makes you put up walls, and it makes you generally just more authoritarian.
Or
And
subjugate your will to a strong man that will
yeah, and
take
you're
care of
also
the
willing to
problem.
do that, right? Because if you're in a good spot, you don't want to give up your power to somebody else. But if you're in a
Mm.
terrible spot, then you're more willing to kind of let go of your power and be like, well, maybe this guy knows what he's doing, and maybe he can help me because I'm so desperate, right? I see that a lot with people who are very progressive, like social justice warrior type people who are progressive to the point where they're authoritarian even. And I think it comes from a place of they feel like like they're weak and vulnerable, and they feel uncomfortable, and they don't feel safe, and they are constantly trying to change things, and they're constantly looking for what the problem is, and they're more than willing to latch on to a problem, and whether or not that actually is the problem for their problem, they're more than willing to get infuriated about that problem as if it is a problem and attack it, because just their general sense of comfort and well-being is somewhat under attack, and they don't feel like they have enough, and they want change. And I see that a lot with the people who most desperately want change, and not to like the point where somebody has like a strong vision or something, but just where they're ready to burn it all down, you know.
Mhm. And that is a part of human nature that I think was been around since they stoned people to death for heresy,
Yeah.
and so it's still there. It's still with
Yeah,
us. I
well, I
think.
saw it in myself too. That's
Well, I agree. I had it too. I mean, I was a bleeding heart, old school liberal type when I was growing up. I was one that was just against the illegal wars. I thought Vietnam was a crime against humanity, and 9/11 was a crime against us all, and all these other types of wars of aggression, and the war on terrorism, and the
hmm
war on cancer, and the war on drugs, and all these authoritarian tropes were just a complete violation of human rights. And I spoke out against it, but I also found out when you speak out against it, it puts you into a category where, polite society will just roll their eyes at you and they'll disengage. So a lot of people are trained, to just not speak out. And then the people who do speak out are pushed past the point of rational discussion a lot of times. There's legitimate grievances,
hmm
with racial justice. There's legitimate grievances with a lot of the gender issues that the social justice people are fighting about. And so I acknowledge that wholeheartedly, but I don't acknowledge the methodology. I don't think that it's
Yeah.
a legitimate way to address it by just, yes, throwing fits and canceling people and refusing to have open discussions about the minutia that really need to be brought out to the forefront.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it, and that's what I think that's what people struggle with. And I don't know if it's just a, like, literally just lack of cognitive ability at times. I've definitely experienced that when I can't think clearly. I'm not willing to take on the nuances of things. And yeah, I don't know what it is, but I think people are really unwilling to look at nuances, and because there's truth to both sides of those things. It's just the I think it's kind of weaponized. They kind of enrage people who are kind of sick and unwell, and there's some truth to it, but they weaponize it and enrage them.
Yeah, but I mean, primitively speaking, when yet indigenous tribes in South America were like encroached upon by other tribes, or the hunting wasn't very good, they would have groups of men go to the other tribe and spear the men to death and take the choice women. And this type of attacking the other tribe has been going on since the very beginning. So like, yeah, when you put people into these tribes and these identity politics groupings, and then you tell them that their problems are because of that other tribe, it's very easy to get people into a collective fury.
Yeah.
And so this is being capitalized upon. So like a lot of people that are part of these social justice movements are actually being used and manipulated as these sociological weapons of the underclass against underclass. And so we're
Hmm.
sitting here fighting with each other over issues that would be better addressed if you could, actually get to the root of the problems. And so people should be able to live and let live, and we should have enough to go around, and we don't have to fight each other over every difference of agreement in a free society.
Hmm.
But it doesn't seem to be what a lot of people are advocating for these days as solutions. It's like, instead of going to a more enlightenment uh, program, we're going more into a regressive authoritarian program. And you see it on all walks of life, and it just seems like maybe that's a facet of the society and where things are going, and maybe even part of human nature, because we go through these culling cycles, whether it's Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, or World War I, where they line up millions of people in trenches and shoot each other with machine guns. And on top of, this the toxic environment of war, you think how much lead you're spitting out everywhere, and all
Yeah,
the
canned
toxic
foods kind of eliminating the zinc.
canned
And
foods. But
well, there's
yeah, with
also, I believe there was also, I think, I don't know if it was a volcano or something, but there's something to do with a lack of sunshine and
uh
crops not getting enough food, and also people not getting enough sunshine during that period. And so,
right.
I mean, you're not getting vitamin D, you're not getting zinc, you're
Yeah,
getting,
sunshine's real essential. Okay, there are clinics in Europe, like alternative health clinics, that will not prescribe an antidepressant until the person has gone through like 6 weeks of sunbed therapy,
hmm
because some places in Northern Europe there might not be enough sun to really get people back up naturally who are depleted. And so
hmm
there are people out there that their main suffering is just not enough fresh air and sunlight. I
yeah,
mean, and they won't do it. They keep covered up constantly, and they're inside, and they're under fluorescent lights, and they're in front of screens, and they just don't get the natural sunlight to revitalize their cells. And that is a major problem for a lot of people. And then you add that to other underlying deficiencies and toxicities, and that's a huge, huge part of the mental health problem that
yeah,
we have before us. And so I don't feel good if I don't have sunlight. I suffered when I was a teenager from what they called seasonal affective disorder, which is basically in the wintertime, you don't get enough sunlight, you don't get enough vitamin D, your immune system gets weak, you get more prone to upper respiratory infections and depression. And so, you know, I've been going to tan beds like probably for the last 20 years, because the lady that I knew that cured cancer naturally without going on chemo, like,
hmm
she bought her own tanning bed, and she tanned excessively, like to the point of being dark, but she was really wise. in really healthy, complete remission after they told her she would be dead in a year if she didn't do the chemo and the surgeries.
Yeah.
And so there are people out there like that that boost their own levels naturally and immense improvements. And so I remember 20 years ago when I was starting on this journey of figuring things out, and I was using tan beds a little bit, and it helped immensely. Or just bright lights, like in real halogen lights in the morning, turn them on real bright if you're living in a
Yeah.
dark. Some places are just really dark and cloudy,
Hmm.
and so you just get some more sunshine in your life, and then that, well, I'm telling you, it'll boost your mood. And then this other lady that was running tan bed actually had one of the early red light therapy machines that were commercially available. So what I do is, you don't have to overdo it with the artificial UV. Just like I would do like 10 minutes in one of the low
I do
intensity
exactly.
beds.
Yeah, I do exactly what you're saying.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then, but then, like, if you had access to red light, you do like a
Yeah,
good
I do.
30,
Yeah.
you do 30 minutes in the red light afterwards, and there's a synergy because the UV rays will actually stimulate the production of vitamin D, and the red light will really just help you take it in and help the cells,
Hmm.
revitalize on an energetic level. And so a lot of times, people just don't have that vitamin D, and it's so essential to revitalize. I mean, think about it. It protects your skin, or it's a product of your skin in reaction to ultraviolet light and cholesterol that creates these precursor protohormones that get converted into vitamin D. And that vitamin D is the prototype for most of your hormones. And you use that to build like natural steroid compounds that help your skin regrow, or that help the viral process, because the viral process is not a disease. It's actually the body rejuvenating and regenerating at a cellular genetic level. And if you don't have that vitamin D, eventually your cells over the course of time become so dysfunctional and defunct and have chromosomal issues because the genes aren't replicating properly, that you have to undergo a viral mutation, like a major viral, like seasonal cold and flu, what they call. But some people just get a little one, and some people get a massive. It depends on how deranged your cells are, but it's part of the natural process. And if you don't have the building blocks for good immunity, then when you go through that process, it might lead to secondary infections. It could lead to organ failure if you're elderly and your body is at the end of its natural life span. It will cause the end of life.
Hmm.
But that is the symptom of a process. It is not a cause. And so we're diagnosing all these diseases, which are really just processes of life and part of the natural cycle. And we can remedy it, but they're dealing with it on the ass end, at the end stage, instead of recognizing all the signs, all the symptoms, which are very obvious. Like we, in the beginning, for people with eyes to see, people who actually look at these things one on one on a personal human level can identify this very easily. And yet, when you go to these doctors who might see you for 15 minutes and they have a patient load of 100 patients that are coming in with all these symptoms being thrown at them, they have no correlation. They have no way of knowing. They have no way of saying, each individual, what is their individual circumstances and what are the environmental factors. They know none of it. They throw a drug at them.
Hmm.
That's it. I mean, 99% of cases. And so 99% of cases, you'll recover regardless of whether you're throwing that drug at, because the body's amazing. And even people who have deficient immune systems, even people who are chronically ill in one way or another, seem to be able to muddle up by or have a remedy that will help them get along. But what I'm saying is that there's entire lifestyle changes that you can implement that will lead you to a road of rejuvenation and health that are far above and beyond anything that the universities are studying right now, or at least they're pushing on the mainstream level. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that is being studied, low carb, meat based diets, ketogenic diet, sunlight therapy. All these things are known on some level. It's just not being pushed in the forefront of the medical universities. And
Yeah.
that could be, we could speculate on why that is.
Yeah.
But how
But
are we on time?
sorry.
How are we on time?
It's 12:18, so I know you got to leave in like 12 minutes.
Yeah, I got a date. Date with
Okay.
destiny.
Yeah. But
But yeah, is there anything else we need to cover in the short time we have?
no, I was liking what you were saying there. I kind of view it as like a house. You got to clean up your house, and if you don't, the mice will clean it up for you, and the bugs will clean it up, and
Oh
that sort
yeah.
of thing.
And
And then you can't blame the mice and the bugs because there's a
you're
bunch
living
of
in a collapsed house that
yeah
you hadn't cleaned in 20 years, and you're like, why did this happen?
yeah yeah.
And
But
then you have to
yeah, I
call in
go
a
to
contractor and spend $100,000 renovating.
yeah yeah yeah. I go to the tanning bed once in a while, and it's like a dual UV and red light, and I
Mhm.
just do like about 10 minutes at a time. And I feel if I haven't done it in a while, like I'll do it for the first time in winter, and I live in Ontario, and it's there's not much sun here in the winter, and yeah, I definitely feel a difference, especially the first time I do it.
Yeah, it's almost necessary for people living in northern climates
Hmm.
and especially in the winter months because when I was younger, I lived down here and like I think the healthiest I remember being was, when I was 10 years old and I'd just run around all summer
Yeah,
long barefoot and shirtless and I'd turn dark.
yeah,
But then I noticed like when I was having my health crises, like I'd pale, like just actually white pale, like
did
whatever
you
it is, the melanin gets sucked out of the skin.
yeah, I think it takes a lot of nutrition to be able to tan. I think it takes a lot of zinc and copper, but also for me at least, when I quit vegetable oils, because
Mhm.
like I mean in a very real way you are what you eat. And so if you're eating these rancid oxidized fats, then your skin membranes, they will be rancid and oxidized and easily damaged by heat, right? But when I
Yeah,
started
I
eating a
mean
lot of
that's
when I started eating a lot of animal fat, saturated fat is stronger, it's more resistant to heat and UV light, and I could tan, and it was a miracle to me because I was always so pale and I would burn so easily. And I feel like I look pale here because the computer screen is shining on me, but like I actually can tan a fair bit, and I feel so grateful. It's like a miracle, and the best I felt was when I could get the most sun, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you totally about the quality of the fats. Like if you're eating vegetable fats and that makes up the constituency of your cell membranes and
Yeah.
how that stuff, if you just have it in the frying pan, it just smokes. The smoke point of it at low heat is
Oh
just
yeah.
what's it doing in your body. And then
Yeah.
yeah, the stability of a saturated grass-fed animal fats, if that's the constituency of your body, plus cholesterol from good quality eggs and just whatever you produce naturally, yeah, your body has these protective uh, layers. And so people who are well nourished and have that good quality, saturated animal fats, I believe that their resiliency is so much better. Where your genetic repair, like whatever they call the UV damage, it's completely mitigated by these
Hmm.
other repair cycles, and it's actually a necessary to go through in order to facilitate the health of the greater immune system. Which the immune system isn't just about fighting bacteria and viruses. It's not. It's an integral part of the entire being that modulates the cells and the cellular response to all sorts of environmental factors. And then it also has repair sequences that are engaged in repairing genetic damage or eliminating cells that can no longer be repaired. And so this cycle is fed off the sunlight, just like all the plants and all the other animals. There's an integral process. And the
Hmm.
idea that we should cut ourselves off from the sun, this is something that's been pushed
Yeah.
for decades. It's just completely inane and absurd on its
It is. It's
face.
it's absurd, and people buy it because, well, I mean, I always thought it was weird. I didn't understand it, but I burned, so I'd cover myself up with sunscreen, and I think that's where a lot of people are at. They don't realize that they can change, and they can go from being somebody who burns in the sun to somebody who tans quite well, and that's kind of one of the messages I want to get out. But yeah, people don't realize that they can change, and
Mhm. Oh
yeah,
yeah, and they should. I mean, life's a lesson, and you have to learn day by
yeah,
day. And if you're not learning and you're not changing, then I don't think you're doing it right. Because there's things that I've changed about my life, even over the course of the last 10 years, and I'm still kind of changing and adapting and shifting. So, I used to be hardcore, absolute zero full carnivore. And now, like, I go on these milk fast every now and then. Like, I think
hmm
it's beneficial for me, like, to fast for a day or so and then drink milk for a couple days and then just get that type of nourishment. And my body at the very beginning of this, I guess, insulin insufficient that I couldn't handle it. Like the carbs, I couldn't handle it. And still my digestion doesn't work right if I drink dairy all the time,
Hmm.
because I think the high levels of fat that I consume, like this, don't metabolize properly with a lot of milk sugar.
Yeah,
But
dairy and high fat don't work well for me either. Like I have to space it out. If I can't have a glass of milk before a high fat meal. Yeah.
yeah, so so you notice it too. But if you
Yeah.
fast and then you just drink like milk for a day or two,
Hmm.
and then it kind of starts to, mucus up in the gut, but I think it's cleansing as long as you're not mixing it. So like there's food combinations that just work and
Hmm.
some that don't. And there's some people that are mountain goats that can eat any food combination and God help
I
them, I guess.
wish.
Wow. Yeah. But when you come from a history like me with severe digestive issues that I had, it took years before I could start reintroducing things, but I came to the point of healing. So there is a process, and it's not overnight, and you can't expect to adapt a new diet and just all of a sudden, just be on the road to health and well-being without any hiccups. And
Yeah.
so, and everybody's individual, so we have to find what works for us, but it's a learning process. And so everybody should be open. And even if you're in a diet that you feel well with for years, as your body ages, you're going to need something else. There's going to be some other requirement or some change. And so just
Yeah.
be open to it, and open to what your body's telling you with the symptoms.
Yeah, it takes a long time to become unhealthy, so you have to expect that it takes a long time to get well again. But
Mhm.
well, I think that was really good. Just kind of introduce the type of person you are, and I'd love to talk to you again if you'd like in the future. Maybe we can get into more of what works for you as an individual, kind of what we are just ending with there, because I know
Yeah,
we
we're
could definitely talk about that a lot more.
Yeah, we're general discussion today because my time's limited, but yeah, we could get into some specifics and topics, and yeah,
Hmm.
have some questions ready, and I can go from there. Yeah, my schedule's kind of hectic, but I should have some time, in the coming months. So yeah, if you
Yeah,
want to check back in with me, that'd be good.
I will absolutely. Well, I appreciate you taking the time here, and I know you're busy, so I'll let you go deal with that endeavor that you got going on.
All right. Yeah, I need every bit of help I need, but
Yeah,
it's fun fighting the power.
good. All right. Best of luck, Derek.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.